So after a long pause of official reveals, we finally have our first new reveals. It's actually 3 cards, the confirmed cover cards for the starter deck for Wind, replacing Stratomoth. And according to aDrive, these were always intended to be the cover cards. They just weren't ready to reveal them yet, which still pretty cool. I think Stratomoth was actually a great way to introduce it. And I think, though, this will grab more attention than Stratomoth, despite aDrive's whole thing being like the bug trainer and such. But really, I just wanted to kind of discuss these cards in the reveal. It's on Monday, October 17th, and leading up to Kickstarter on the 15th, there should be a reveal every single day, if according to aDrive. So this is going to be a pretty exciting next little less than a month. This should be 29 days, I believe, if I did my math right. But let's go on and discuss the cards. So we've got 3 new cards here. Ascension line, Hydrake being the 1 spirit, Twindra being the 2 spirit, and Penterror being the 3 spirit. So these all cards kind of are related. The value of these cards are related to each other. So let's just go over all 3 right away. So Hydrake is a 1 wind spirit, 4/1 or 4 attack, 1 defense Elestral, whose ability is when this Hydrake is destroyed in battle, you may special enchant a Twindra from your hand or deck to the field in attack position. So pretty much it floats into the 2 spirit Elestral. So you don't even have to normal send it. If your opponent tries to attack over it, you will get out a nice Twindra, or actually you could even crash it to get out your own Twindra. So let's obviously the value of this card is going to be linked to Twindra as it directly references it in its effect and pulls it out. So let's go over Twindra. Twindra is a 2-wind spirit, 5 attack, 4 defense Elestral, which says when this Twindra is destroyed in battle, you may special enchant a Penterror from your hand or deck to the field. So note this one does not need to be in. You can put it in attack or defense position. So just like Hydrake, let's to Twindra, let's talk about Penterror, as Twindra's value is also related to that. So Penterror is a 3-wind spirit, 15 attack, 8 defense Elestral, which says when this Penterror is destroyed in battle, you may special enchant any number of Hydrakes or Twindras from your hand or deck to the field in attack position. So if you're just attacking into these things, you really can't get rid of them. So pretty cool there. Just a great way to kind of keep throwing out bodies on board to keep up tempo. Quite like that aspect of it. But I really want to break up this discussion into 2 parts. The first one being the meta discussion, and the second part being just these cards separate to the meta as like a fun deck to build around. So getting into the meta discussion, I want to put a disclaimer out here first. This discussion is based off of the prototype deck meta format, as that's all we know right now. This can greatly change and probably will, due to Dan confirming that a lot of cards will probably be changed or tweaked slightly in between prototype deck and official launch. And that's just the prototype deck format was to try to iron out those kinks anyway. So there's a strong chance that what I'm saying now won't relate to the actual meta of set 1. But I still think it's important to discuss these to kind of get ideas going into it, even if stuff keeps changing, just to kind of get a baseline for these cards. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let's start with Penterror, as I think it's easier to discuss the other 2 once we kind of get out Penterror's value. So Penterror being a 15 attack, 8 defense Elestral means it's not going to be easy to hit over it, as only really the 3 spirit Elestrals can compete with it in attack. You would have to do something crazy with like a Volcaris or Tectorus for the 1 spirit Elestrals to be able to attack over it. There might be some 2 cost Elestrals that can interact with it that I'm not thinking about off the top of my head, but that's kind of my first thought, is that if you're just attacking over it while it's in attack position, you really need to be on those 3 spirit Elestrals to attack over it. And as far as defense, its defense is actually quite solid. So of course 3 spirit Elestrals more likely than not will easily be able to attack over it. But in terms of the 2 and 1 spirit Elestrals, the only 2 spirit Elestral I can think of that with just raw attack alone can attack over Penterror is Blazerus at 9, I believe. So that's promising as well, that the 2 spirits can't easily attack over it even in defense. And the 1 spirits pretty much can't touch this out. Even like Volcaris and Tectoros will struggle to hit over this, as that hitting that attack is actually pretty difficult. And the other reason I kind of brought the 2 spirit Elestrals was one of the most common ones I see hit 7 or 8 attack as well, and 8 attack just isn't enough. So a really, really solid stat line for sure, and really makes it so that it can't. The one big thing is you don't want it to be easily attacked over if you're committing 3 spirits into it and taking multiple turns to try to ascend up into it potentially. But where that analysis becomes interesting is its effect requires it to be destroyed in battle. But if its stat line is favorable for it to not be destroyed in battle, then the opponent's more likely to rely on removal effects to deal with it, in which case you just put 3 spirits out to lose it to a removal card, which are at this moment more efficient than 3 spirits. So that's kind of where I think this card falls flat in the meta, is that most likely it's going to be dealt with your counter runes, your earthquakes, your Kinleos, which bypass that destruction effect altogether. But let's even back away from what's in the meta, and let's actually do a quick thought experiment on this card. Let's just say that even if the opponent does opt to attack over it somehow, what's really going to happen here? Well, you fill up your board with Twindras and Hydrakes, which gives you great Ascension targets for your next turn. Unless a card comes out that can interact with it, with the current card pool in this thought experiment, there is no way to interact with your opponent just throwing out a ton of Twindras and Hydrakes off of a destruction of a Penterror. Because the opponent's in their battle phase, they can't use any, flip up any runes or play any from hand at that point. They have to wait. Really, they would have to wait until their next turn to start doing stuff. And there's also no wide board clear cards either. And even if there was, the only way you could deal with a wide board without having to wait till your turn is if those board clear cards could be timed for your opponent's turn at some point, or even like end of your turn or something. So the point I'm trying to get at with that is that there's a strong chance that maybe you just don't want to attack over this. Don't give the opponent that value, because they can probably steamroll you with it. Instead, just try to stall to draw your removal effect card to get rid of it instead. So in that sense, while the effect is super flashy and super cool, a smart opponent probably will just deny you it anyway, so you're not really going to see that effect go off. So then the question becomes, does forcing your opponent to then use removal spells and not attack over it, or the pressure it puts on by limiting how your opponent can effectively respond to it, is that good enough? And that is really hard to judge without a context of a meta. So I think it's about outside the scope of a thought experiment right now. Another facet to this thought experiment would be, if your opponent finds a way to actually attack over this Penterror, a lot of times that attacker probably won't be threatened by a Twindra or a Hydrake they call out on board. So even in the scenario where your opponent attacks over it, even you spawning a ton of stuff on your board might not be that great, as you're taking away from your own spirit deck, which is another angle I'll want to go more in depth in a little bit. But for the sake of argument, sure, it can set up for you to then ascend in maybe to another Penterror to attack over it. But if that Penterror still can't attack over it, you're pretty much just stalling at that point until you draw an answer, which I don't think is terrible necessarily. But ideally, if you're splitting up this Penterror into a ton of little guys, you really want to just rush down your opponent afterwards with all those because of that spirit investment. But if you can't necessarily attack over with destroyed Penterror, you're just forced to use those 4 cards on board to try to stall out until you draw into an answer, which debatable how effective that will be, if you'll have enough spirits or stabilize long enough to be able to do anything, or if you'll just burn out and not be able to attack over whatever your opponent has on board. So some concerns there on that front as well. So I mentioned the angle of these cards requiring a lot of spirits to use, and how is that spirit commitment worth the payoff? Because this could put you in a scenario where you burn out quicker than your opponent, and if these cards don't do enough, then why are you using the spirits to use it? On top of that, this also leaves you maybe more susceptible to being burned through cards like Eruption and Exalt. I mean, your opponent could just go over the top and not even have to deal with Penterror at all. Or even if they can deal with the Penterror, maybe it's in their benefit to destroy Penterror by battle, for tempt you to use spirits on Twindra and Hydrake, and then just throw down that Eruption the next turn to try to end it. So there's a lot of ways. I guess the best way to summarize this card is, I see a lot of ways that your opponent can take what this card does and use it against you to pull out a victory. And I'm kind of finding more of those scenarios right now than I am positives for this card. And I will admit, I think it's a lot easier to see the negatives of this card in a purely theoretical viewpoint, or these thought experiments, than actually playing the card itself and seeing how often your opponent can come up with those punishing scenarios for what you play. So that is, I want to put a huge asterisk on all these thought experiments. I think these are important things to keep track of when testing this, as there are possible punishes, but we won't know how likely these punishes are until we actually get play testing. Scoping it back into the prototype deck format that we do know and away from the thought experiments, the other kind of angle about Penterror is that it doesn't really address any of the issues that the three-spirit Elestrals currently have in the format. And that's, since this one just gets punished so easily by Earthquakes, Rest on Your Laurel, Shield, Poison Tip Arrow, Kindleo, Boombat, there's so many destruction effects that Penterror falls victim to, those exact destruction effects are actually what keep Majesty, Trifernal, all the three-spirit Elestrals in check right now. So because those aren't seeing much play, Penterror falls victim to those outs as well. I don't actually see Penterror seeing much competitive play because of that. I know there's always the argument of just equip Bag of Winds to it, therefore Earthquake and Rest on Your Laurels can't touch it, and technically any counter runes that target, but the issue is the counter runes that target right now, or the counter runes that are most commonly played right now, and actually, all the counter runes, in fact, actually can target this card. So Shield doesn't target, meaning it bypasses Bag of Winds. Poison Tip Arrow's timing puts it before you can equip it with Bag of Winds. Gorgon's Gaze, again, you can use it before you equip Bag of Winds, and also can stop a normal Ascension if need be to prevent Penterror from hitting the field at all. And Pandora's Box, if you're trying to use Twin Terror's effect to go into it, also stops it. And then I guess Tsunami, that one's a bit of a hard one to kind of justify because it just switches to defense, and I already talked about the defense part of it, so I don't even think that's being part of this discussion with Bag of Winds as well. But the four generic counter runes all interact with this card, and Bag of Winds won't stop it. So really, Bag of Winds only stops Laurels and Earthquake. Doesn't even stop the Celestial Destruction as well. So as such, I think that I come to the same conclusion with this card as I do all the other three-spirit Elestrals. It's just too high risk, high reward. If your opponent has those outs, it's just so much more efficient. You're losing on so many spirits without really any payoff, which is a bit unfortunate. But thankfully, since things are changing, we might see new cards introduced or cards changed where our answers aren't as oppressive, and this card might be able to see a bit more play. So I've talked a lot about Penterror. Let's switch over to Twindra and Hydrake. I think my biggest issue with these two cards in a meta context is they just don't hit that great of numbers. Hydrake here looks like it does at 4 attack, 1 defense is whatever. It doesn't stop cards like Kindleo from being good, and Nekruff or Sorlet. Those are common 1 defense cards. But that 4 attack I think is very notable here. And that is because despite early on a lot of us saying like the magic numbers to hit are 4 and 5, as we've gotten more reveals and the meta shaped further, I would argue 4 is like that middle number. If you hit 4 and it has a good effect, you're definitely playing it, but you can't expect to necessarily attack over stuff without some assistance from other cards. Meanwhile, 5 and 6 attack I think are the magic numbers just because 5 hits over 4 and 6 hits over 5. So I think we've kind of shifted up 1 magic number each. And since Hydrake breaks even on that, it really isn't going to attack over much. And sure, you can make the argument, well, you can crash it, summon out a Twindra. And I actually think that is the best case scenario for this card, which I'll kind of get into at the end of this. But the Hydrake here, just being able to maybe trade at most, but also struggle against those 5 and 6 attacks without assistance, it doesn't seem too good there. I think if it was 5 attack, we would have more to talk about here, but not so much 4 attack. It's one of those cards, I guess the best way I can describe my thoughts on it being 4 attack is it doesn't completely write it off, but it would obviously be better if it was 5 attack. And then Twindra here, for a 2-spirit Celestial, just 5/4 is very unremarkable. You've got Arrowmare with a 4/5 stat line for 1 spirit, and that's just so much better. It doesn't really compete with the 2-spirit Elestrals whatsoever. And in terms of the 1-spirit Elestrals, just hitting 5 attack is whatever. You've got so many that can crash into it. You've got answers that can easily hit over it, as a Nekruff under Volcanic Forge can hit over it. I mean, even Sorlet, or I should say Sorlet plus Island of Aeolia, because it gives Twindra the power. But I guess point is that you can throw out a 5 attack, and if you have a stadium that can increase its attack that isn't Island of Aeolia, you're hitting over it. Mostation can hit over this. So it just, if it's, for it being a 2-spirit, if it was at least 6 attack, again, I think we would be talking a bit better here. And like the 4 defense, honestly, is just whatever for a 2-spirit Elestral. If you're playing out a 2-spirit Elestral, I really think you want to be competing with the board right now, and this card just doesn't from either stat line. And my assessment of its ability to play out a Penterror is pretty much exactly the same thing as Penterror being able to call out all the other ones. Granted, Penterror will definitely do more on board than Twindra, but there's just so many ways to bypass it. The good news about Twindra is it's less of a commitment at only 2 spirits versus Penterror's 3 spirits, but with so many ways to out it, I still don't think 2 spirits is necessarily worth it. So note, I haven't really talked about Hydrate going into Twindra, because I actually think the niche these 2 cards can fit in, or this line can fit in, which will probably see the best play, is running really any number of Hydrakes will be fine, and running 1 Twindra and 1 Penterror. Maybe 2 Twindra, but I think only 1 Twindra will be necessary for this, and that is so you kind of put your opponent in the situation with Hydrake, where they might be encouraged to use one of their removal cards on Hydrake, so you can use it as a bait, as your opponent might not want to necessarily deal with the Twindra that you spawn off of it. So, and that you can pretty much bait out their removal cards to then securely play another one of your other plays, like maybe throw down an Exaltair without any issue to be able to Nexus, maybe uncontested Sorlet to answer their board, a P-Gust to start popping other runes, or really just, I think baiting out counter runes and other removal cards is really good right now, and I actually think Hydrake does that phenomenally. The only, I guess, counterpoint to that would be that your opponent might be fine with you throwing out a Twindra because it forces you to commit more spirits, and they just hold the counter card for that, which in that scenario it's a bit less good, but it really just comes up to see how I think we'll get our answer whether or not it's worth it with testing. And the other reason I say that is because there's actually some good value off of this. Being able to, if your opponent doesn't have the answer to Hydrake, either they leave it up on board and you can get great tempo advantage, or if they attack over it, you still maintain tempo with a Twindra, which against 1 Spirit Elestrals, it isn't phenomenal, but at least it hits 5 attack and you can easily float into it and keep up tempo. Even though it's 2 spirits, you can still put on a bit of pressure with it, which I don't think is too bad there, especially under Island of Aeolia. If you're running more of a win-focused strategy, I really don't think that's too bad there. And again, I think this is actually the best use case for it. And the other nice thing is I could see Hydrake being pretty flexible. I was mentioning how 4 is a pretty unremarkable attack stat, as a lot of times you might just be crashing. But crashing might not be too bad here, as you can crash the Hydrake into something, float into your Twindra, and then attack the opponent right away for 2. Which, in that regard, I actually don't think that's quite bad. You deal with an opponent's Elestral, you get a stronger Elestral on board. Granted, you're committing more spirits, but you at least get that burn from it. And the only thing I could think of is maybe not the best if your opponent has an answer to it, but in that regard, you're playing... The counters would be Poison Tip, Pandora's, and Shield. If your opponent shields, you're spending 2 spirits to force your opponent to use 2 spirits to get rid of a counter rune. That one I think will need testing to see how good that is, but doesn't sound too bad off the top. Pandora's I think is just actually a bad response to it. You're giving up 2 spirits when Pandora's would counter the Twindra before it gets enchanted, so you don't even use the spirits. So you just force your opponent to use up 2 spirits. That's probably best case scenario, so I don't think Pandora's a good counter to it. And Poison Tip, I also don't think is a great counter to it. It's one of those that you might have to do just because you wouldn't be able to deal with it otherwise, but flipping up a Poison Tip is still a 2-spirit commitment, and you're still taking 2 spirits. So I could definitely... Talking about these scenarios, I really think the Hydrake and the Twindra here, that combo is probably the most likely to see some meta play. I don't know if it will be meta, as I've kind of shown there's a lot of uncertainty around it, but I actually do think it's worth testing, as that seems like some pretty cool plays for some deck. And for Penterror in this, sure, you can run 1 Penterror if your opponent then attacks over a Twindra, or if you have another scenario where you can crash Twindra, throw out Penterror, and attack them for 3. That's not too bad either. I just think that's less likely, as more than likely, if you throw out your Twindra, it's going to get destroyed by a removal effect, so you don't even get your Penterror anyway. So I think Penterror is a bit of a stretch. I think that sweet spot will be around Hydrake and Twindra. That being said, though, if you ever get in a scenario where you can crash Twindra, or your opponent's... I don't think your opponent would ever attack over it, honestly, in fear of a Penterror, unless they have a reason to force you to use those 3 spirits. But if you're ever in a scenario to be able to hit with Twindra and go straight into a Penterror, that's a huge bomb you can drop that could be pretty devastating. It's I think my final point I want to make on that, though, is in that scenario, if your opponent has a shield, it's they force you to use these 3 spirits and they just have to use 2 to remove it in return. I don't think that's a favorable trade. That's pretty much your opponent using an eruption on you. So that's the other reason why I'm not saying, like, I don't think, if anything, I think Penterror will not be used in that combo. It'll just be the Hydreigon and Twindra, as I keep saying. But now that I've kind of gone over the meta side of this, I want to then switch focuses over to the kind of fun aspect of Elestrals and just kind of casual play. And in casual play, this card's phenomenal. It's going to be so much fun. Just being able to drop and swarm the board. Oh, I actually am really excited to build a casual deck around this line to see what I can have happen. And casual can get a bit slippy depending on how casual the player is. Are they playing more shields, so on and so forth. But just kind of like any of the other 3-Spirit Elestrals, it's really fun just to be able to get off the effect and can make for some really hype games and content. So I think that Penterror for a casual card is phenomenal. So much fun, so much packed into it. You know, I'm sure plenty of us content creators are going to be so hyped to try to get off this effect and just swarm the opponent, Twindras and Hydras. But that's really about it. I just think it's just a hype card in general. So in summary of my thoughts, I think Hydreigon and Twindra should definitely be tested for meta, as I think they create a pretty cool tempo core that can also put out some pressure, but I think Penterror is too high of a commitment card and falls to all the same pitfalls as the other 3-Spirit Elestrals, and thus probably won't be very good. For casual play, though, these cards are phenomenal. They're going to be super fun. I'm going to have fun building casual decks around it, just face off against other casual decks, trying to get off Penterror's powerful abilities and such. In this Ascension line, it's going to be a lot of fun. So jumping to me from later in the day, I was debating how I wanted to upload these videos, knowing that there's going to be daily reveals, because I certainly can't keep up with them daily. Today was a bit of it was a unique day where I was actually working from home, so I could record this and edit it on my lunch break, but I won't be able to do that if I'm working in an office. So because of that, my thought is, since there's 3 cards today, I had a lot to talk about with these 3, that I'd upload this video independently, and then I would try to do a weekly recap of all the cards revealed. I don't know when I will specifically do that, if I want to try to upload it maybe Saturday, or I might wait till see the reviews throughout the weekend, or the reveals throughout the weekend, and upload my recap on Monday, that I can get like a full 7 days. I haven't fully decided on that. I think I'll also play it a bit by ear, depending on how big some of the reveals are, so it might be a bit more sporadic than that. But I am planning on recording my reactions either day of, day after, when I get the chance to, and just kind of combine them into one video in this kind of style to discuss. So look forward to that. Also, make sure to follow me on Twitter for updates about all the stuff I am planning on. I've got the Vanguard box openings hopefully coming out on Friday. I've got the case hopefully coming on Monday, going to live stream that. Of course, there's the Elestrals tour still going on, so you can get updates on when I'm going to start posting content on that. And now you'll be able to receive updates for when my video kind of going over the new reveals will be coming out. So look forward to all that.